I'm going to talk to you guys about two substances that are highly addicting and can be super helpful if used correctly. We all use them probably. If you haven't in a while, you probably have before. That is caffeine and sugar. Okay? I promise you they're not all bad, but we have to learn what purpose they serve and also how to use them to get the most from it. So that's what this video is going to be about. First, we're going to talk about caffeine, then we're going to get to sugar, and we're going to talk about the purposes and also how to effectively use them. All right, let's go. First function that caffeine serves is it provides mental clarity. It also helps reduce reaction time, meaning that if we're engaged in a task like exercise, bodybuilding, our reaction time is a lot quicker. So this has been proven in studies where they had individuals split into two groups, caffeine, non-caffeinated. The ones that drank the caffeine were a lot quicker to push a button when they heard a sound, significantly, than the other group. So it improves our reaction time. It does this because it activates the frontal lobe. Okay, so that means that we're sharper. That's a great benefit of caffeine. And in just a little bit, I'm going to tell you when to get the best results for that mental clarity, how to use caffeine appropriately. All right. Second thing is it's a reinforcer. So what this means is that we are attached to the experience that we get from caffeine. It's a neural pathway we've created in our brain. You might have experienced this if, say, you've liked coffee, you like the effects that coffee give you, the stimulation, the clarity. You might notice that some mornings when you go and pour your cup of coffee, you already get a mood boost and you already get a little excited before you even had a sip. That's that reinforcer in our brain. So an interesting point about this is if we engage in activities that we enjoy already, such as exercise, maybe we enjoy studying, learning new things, if we have caffeine while we do that, when we come back to that activity again, exercise, studying, whatever it is, even if we don't have caffeine, our brains have made a connection to that activity, a neural pathway that's triggered, and it's a little bit of a mood booster. That ties into the third purpose that caffeine can serve, and that is that it does enhance our sense of well-being. It does this because it increases our dopamine receptors, so it gives us more room for happy feelings. Back to our example before, if we use caffeine when we engage in experiences, that caffeine is increasing our dopamine receptors, which means that we're going to feel better while we're doing that activity. You've probably experienced this before if you've used caffeine. So make a note. You can do that same activity again without caffeine, and it will actually give you a greater sense of well-being than it would have if you hadn't used caffeine before. So think about that with the activities you don't enjoy, okay? It doesn't mean that forever, just to be able to get through that activity, you have to use caffeine. It's the opposite. If you've used caffeine during that activity before, you're going to have greater capacity to enjoy that activity the next time you come around to it because your brain has made that assimilation. So keep that in mind. You don't have to use caffeine all the time to feel good, but if you've used it before, it's almost like you're piggybacking off of that experience again. Pretty cool. Okay, so we know what caffeine is. We know the purposes it serves. How can we get the most out of the benefits from caffeine? So I want you to know something. First thing in the morning, our cortisol levels go up a little bit. And the reason for this is that it helps naturally clear out adenosine so that way we aren't feeling so lethargic. We aren't feeling so draggy in the morning, so to speak. Your levels of adenosine in your system are associated with more fatigue. The higher the levels, the more fatigued you feel. So first thing in the morning, your cortisol is going to be up a little bit. And the reason for that is so it can naturally clean that out. So if first thing in the morning, you wake up and you immediately grab your caffeine, you're not going to get the most benefit from it. And in addition to that, you're actually going to you're going to prohibit your natural cortisol from wiping out that adenosine. It's going to take away that ability. So try not to have your caffeine right when you wake up. If you can wait 90 to 100 minutes after waking up to have your first dose of caffeine, that's going to go a much longer way because you're basically going to be coming off the tail end of that cortisol adjustment for your adenosine. So what I would say is if you can, wait 90 to 100 minutes to have your first dose of caffeine because you're going to have more benefits, the clarity, the mood boost, the energy. It's going to be a little more prominent if you can wait that period of time. And in addition to that, it's going to be dragged out longer. So you're going to experience the benefits for a longer period of time. If you can't wake up and not have your caffeine first thing, I suggest having half of your caffeine as soon as you wake up and the other half 90 to 100 minutes into your day. A blanket assumption we want to take from this is don't replace what your body can naturally do with chemicals, with substances that you're adding to it. Don't negate the purpose of cortisol in the morning. Don't take that power away from it, because that's when dependence comes in on these substances. For instance, if every single morning you wake up and you dose with caffeine right away, your body is not going to naturally produce that cortisol that it would have otherwise. It's like that across the board with our hormone regulation. We don't want to start replacing what our body can naturally do with chemicals, point blank. So I will say, and you've probably heard this before, you do want to cut off your caffeine consumption before it's too late in the day. Ideally, you'll cut it off 12 hours before you go to sleep. Even if you're one of these people that can fall asleep very easily after having a shot of espresso, for instance, you're not getting as deep a sleep. So try to cut your caffeine off early in the day. Don't feel like you got to make all these changes right at once, but be intentional, ease into it. And I promise you, you're going to enjoy your caffeine more and you're going to get more from it. And before I move on to the real dopamine boost, sugar, I want to point out the effect that overuse of caffeine has on our feelings of happiness, on our natural production of dopamine. As I mentioned, when we have caffeine, it does increase our dopamine receptors, meaning that it gives us a greater capacity to feel good. So think about it. If you're dosing yourself with caffeine all throughout the day, again, you're taking your body's ability to create natural dopamine receptors away. So that way you're becoming dependent on caffeine. So instead of going and doing your workout and getting that natural, beautiful boost of dopamine that you get, you're not going to feel quite as good as you would if you weren't abusing caffeine. I don't mean to say the word abusing, but I don't know what else to say. So just limit it. Try to use it sparingly and try to use it smart. Now we'll move on to sugar. And I'm not talking to the person that's keto, and I mean true keto, like real ketosis, not just keto half the week, okay? So this applies to people that do eat carbs. People that are keto, truly keto, their body does adjust and it gets to where it uses other resources for energy. So the purpose of this discussion is to talk about the meathead like me and others who love to build muscle and love to eat carbs, okay? The best place in your day where you can have carbs, sugar, is around your workout. Why is this? Well, because you need to think about carbs as energy. Carbs interact with the neurons in our brain and they energize us. That's what they're supposed to be used for. They're not really supposed to be used for pleasure, even though we do get that effect from it. But they're used for energy. And so along with that, we also need to be concerned about our blood sugar and that where those levels are. So when we work out, we completely deplete our muscle glycogen. That muscle glycogen needs to be replenished for us to grow muscles, to get stronger. That's where carbs come in. Carbs replenish that muscle glycogen. And the best time that you can eat your high sugar carbs, I mean like high on the glycemic index, we'll get into that in a minute, is right after your workout. Right after your workout. You're so depleted at that point, and your blood sugar, when you consume those carbs, is going to spike. And what's going to happen is you're not going to experience as much of a crash because you need the carbs at that point. You're completely depleted, and it's replenishing that depletion really fast if you use carbs that are high on the glycemic index. What is the glycemic index? It's just a fancy word to discuss the different variations of carbs and how concentrated with sugar they are. So high up on the glycemic index is our really sugary foods. So some examples of these are going to be things like candy, cake, mangoes, Snickers bars, all the yummy chocolates. Those are higher on the glycemic index because they're very concentrated with sugar. Now, the lower ones are going to be things like your oats, your rice, your potatoes. So you can think about that as lower on the glycemic index, and the sugary, yummy stuff higher on the glycemic index. So why that's important is because of the pathways in our minds, in our brains, that are created from the use of sugar. The ones that are higher up, all those good yummies, we create much stronger connections to those for a couple reasons. Of course, they taste better, they taste yummy, but that's not even the main reason. The main reason is it gives us a very quick spike in energy, hence why we can use them right after our workouts and not really be affected by it, unless you have cravings, which we'll get into. But they spike your blood sugar really quickly. So we have to be careful with these because things like fruit, for example, that's a little higher on the index. When we eat those, we're pretty hungry an hour later, okay? Or a certain amount of time later. So they make us feel hungrier. They produce a chemical in our brain called ghrelin. And what this does is the more ghrelin we have in our brain, the hungrier we feel. The lower ghrelin amount that we have in our brain, the less hungry we feel. So I want you to think about this in terms of a visual, okay? You got your glycemic index here. All these carbs that are up here that are really high in sugar are going to increase your ghrelin levels. The ones down here aren't going to so much. So think about that. Let's look at the big picture here. Think about things like fruit. Fruit has fructose in it, so not super high concentrations. It's very different than high fructose corn syrup, which is found in, again, those yummy foods up here. But think about this. If you have a fruit or you have a piece of candy, high on the index, got a little more concentration of sugar in them, not only is the taste going to be what you want an hour after eating it, because you already have that sweet taste in your mouth, so you're going to want that again. You're not going to want to go down here to these bland, lower tier carbs. So you're going to crave the taste, but also you're going to be hungrier than you would have if you would have chosen one of these down here. Okay, so think about that next time you go to grab a banana instead of your oats. Okay, not only is your cravings probably going to be kicked up a little bit for sugar, but you're also not going to have the same amount of energy. You're going to crash a little faster. So it's almost like you can think about these up here as like the quick fix, the things that make us feel good pretty quick and really restore our energy and make us feel exceptional. And then they end a lot quicker. Or you can think about these down here. They give us the energy. They do still taste good. And they provide a lot of mental energy as well, but we're not going to crash as fast on them. They're going to be longer lasting. So that's a great way to look at the difference in sugars, all right? And just remember, sugars serve a purpose. Sugars are in carbs. Carbs give us mental and physical energy. So they're not bad. But if we're using them all throughout the day when we don't need them, we're going to be like this, and our mood's going to be all over the place because we're going to be up here, and then we're going to crash, and then we're going to be up here, and we're going to crash, and we're going to have cravings that are a little out of control. So knowing this information, you can really direct your choices a lot better. And the last thing I'm going to end on is if you do have a sweet tooth and you do tend to say cheat on your meal plan a lot or grab the sweet foods when you know you shouldn't, try to replace it with those carbs that are lower on the index because they're going to satisfy you more than you realize. Don't just try to deplete yourself and just drink water or forget about it. If you're obsessing about a sweet food, grab a carb that is lower on the glycemic index. That's going to last you longer. Your cravings aren't going to be as bad and you're not going to be as hungry later on.